This is an exciting day for us because it's our first debut of some hard data and numbers coming out of our testing lab, where we have new equipment like this sound chamber, where we've gotten the noise floor down to 12 to 14 dBA, an insane reduction. And we're using it for something else exciting, which is the first major Steam Deck controversy. The controversy was that the Steam Deck was found to be using two different fans. There's a Huaying version that is shipped in the original review units, and then there's also a Delta fan that's going out in retail units, and Valve is switching between the two fans based on supply. Out of this stemmed some outrage about the noise quality coming out of the two fans, and that's what we're using this and our sound booth to test today, so we can get you some real world numbers and some hard scientific numbers where there's no more guessing happening. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Montech Sentry 850 Gold power supply. The Sentry 850 watt is an 80 plus gold certified power supply, also available in 550 watt and 650 watt capacities at generally competitive prices with the rest of the market. The Sentry 850 watt includes a 5-year warranty, 2 EPS 12 volt connectors, 6 PCIe cables, and plenty of peripheral cables, making it easy to scale this modular power supply up or down for your build. Learn more at the link in the description below. So that's really the controversy. It's just that there's two of these. Manufacturers will regularly switch supply of components in their product. This happens a lot with VRMs, where capacitors change out, for example, and some of the, not motherboards normally, but other types of electronic devices. You'll also see this with SSDs, where the flash memory changes out sometimes better, sometimes worse. In this instance, the device that's explicitly changing is that fan, and there are only two versions we're aware of. So Huaying is the original fan. It's got this little blue H on it that shipped in the review units, including ours. And then Delta, which of course is a very well-known brand, is the one that was causing problems for people on Reddit when the original posts went up. To get everyone on the same page, we're gonna play you two clips of two different fans in our Steam Deck without identifying which they are. And you can post in the comments which one you think is which. We'll reveal it a little later, and that will allow you to understand what people were upset about online. So that was it. First of all, let us know if you think you heard it, which you thought was better, and then secondly, let's get into the discussion of how we're testing this and what the results are. So for some background, we've been contracting with Mike Chin, formerly from Silent PC Review. Many of you likely remember him, one of the earliest contributors to high-end computer hardware and audio equipment reviews from quite a while ago at this point, and really advanced the process of testing sound and sound quality from a third-party reviewer perspective. So we worked with Mike Chin. Our sincere thanks to him for dealing with all of our many questions in this process to try and nail something down. However, this is the first time we're using our sound chamber, and because of that, it means that we are going to use a little bit softer language in some parts than we might normally, just because we're still learning frequency spectrum analysis and some of the ins and outs of getting good quality data out of this. Although we are confident in the data we've recovered from testing the Steam Deck, we're still learning how to process and analyze it. So work with us on that. We'll keep learning as we go with more of these. Okay, so some background on the testing before we get into the data. The machine behind me is a fully passive box. It makes functionally zero noise, nothing that picks up in this chamber anyway. And that machine is used for all of our sound recording measurements. We have all of the noise testing equipment and noise logging equipment hooked up to the PC through a pass-through in this noise chamber. The noise chamber itself has a 4-inch gap in between the steel walls, where it is filled with various types of padding, sound absorbing materials or blocking materials to get the noise floor that we get in here. So our old testing methodology established a noise floor of approximately 26 dBA for testing, and our testing methodology when we are using this chamber establishes a noise floor of around 12 to 14 dBA depending on the time of test. In the instance of the Steam Deck here, we're at about a 14 dBA noise floor. So without getting too into the weeds on all of this, basically the short of it is we kept a 20-inch standardized measurement distance. All the measurements were from a fixed distance. The Steam Deck was actually facing the other direction like this, and we made sure that there was no exhaust pointed towards the microphone, which is in the back there, and was positioned towards the Steam Deck itself, although I can't get the angle. So that's the basics of how we set it up. We won't go into further detail here. We have a video of unboxing this chamber if you're curious in it. So for this testing, additionally, we had controls on things like temperature. We had a thermocouple running into the chamber to log the second-to-second thermals internally. We also checked on atmospheric pressure, humidity, things like that, ran all the testing at the same time. And then we used an SSH shell basically tunneled into the Steam Deck to control the fan speed for testing to make sure it was the same speed every time we ran the tests. And we, before doing that, evaluated the fan speed with the different workloads the Steam Deck encounters, and those are the same as before for the most part. Time to get into testing now. So first we'll look at standalone noise levels and ignore the type of sound produced by the fans. Then we'll look at the type of sound. In terms of raw noise levels, tested in this heavily controlled environment, we confidently determined that there is approximately a 1 dBA difference between the fans at each given fan RPM tested. The Steam Deck only really uses 0 RPM, 4100 RPM, occasionally 5,000 RPM, 6,000 RPM, and occasionally 6,300 RPM. We tested all the other steps that were relevant in between as well, just in case it gets reprogrammed at some point by Valve, and that worked out because more recently, Valve added custom fan curves that can be built around other RPM levels, including user-defined ones. At 4,100 RPM, the Delta fan was approximately 1 dBA louder than the Huaying fan. At 6,000 RPM and 6,300 RPM, they were within 0.5 dBA of each other. The 7,000 plus RPM numbers weren't ever produced in real-world use for our testing, but the fans are capable of it, so we tested that as well. They were within 1 dBA once again, and then equal at the end of the test range. So a couple things here. First of all, sample size starts to matter when the differences are this small. We only have 2 samples we can really confidently test. We could do more Huaying fans, but we only have the 1 Delta fan right now. And that means that it's kind of hard to draw a firm conclusion that do all the Delta and Huaying fans have this 1 dBA difference, or is it just the 2 units we have? Now, based on what we've read online, it sounds like this is more or less in line with what people's experiences are. However, it's difficult to really judge that because most people only have the experience of 1 Steam Deck versus whatever random iPhone video they found online or what a reviewer said about a different unit previously. So hard to draw a firm conclusion there, but what really matters is that humans can't typically detect a 1 dBA difference. The range of difference where it's most commonly noticed in consulting with Mike Chin on this is about 3 dBA for when people start to really begin to pick it up. And then you get at a 10 dBA range and it's starting to double the perceived noise to the human ear, which by the way is different than the doubling of acoustic power, which happens sooner than that. In the very least, we're confident in our testing for the 2 units we had, showing this 1 dBA difference functionally the same, at least in noise level. With that out of the way, we should look at the type of noise, since that'll be more noticeable than the noise level. We can do this both subjectively and objectively with frequency spectrum analysis. First, we'll play some audio clips for you from each of the fans. We'll use text on the screen to describe the scenario, but we won't reveal which fan is which until after a blind playthrough. This is to help you eliminate your own bias and evaluate whether you think either sounds better than the other. We'll play them in the same order each time as well. One very important thing we need to point out here too, the clips we're about to play for you are not the same ones we did the noise analysis with. So they're not the same frequency spectrum noise samples that we took. We took those samples in this chamber, and the samples we're going to play for you were taken in our sound booth, which is designed more for representing human hearing explicitly and getting something more of a recording environment that would best convey to the audience what we're hearing in real-world use without sort of narrowing in too much or too overly scientifically. So, taken 2 different ways, we're not analyzing the same samples. First, here are 2 back-to-back clips comparing the fan ramp. Next, here's the maximum noise level we encountered on each fan under a gaming workload. And next, here's a noise clip from the perspective of the player, so with the mic mounted further away from the screen and more at an angle down. And these were all tested with identical microphone locations and known distances for the position. So before we reveal them, go ahead and make up your mind on whether you think the first or the second has a more desirable tone, if either. Post your thoughts in the comments as well. And here's the reveal. Now it's time for something that is a little different for GN. We're doing some subjective analysis. This is a little tricky because subjective noise analysis, it's a little bit of a trap. Everyone perceives noise a little bit differently. Also, you have to factor in that it's getting recorded through a microphone, rendered, compressed via YouTube and uploaded, so you lose a little bit of the fidelity there, but not enough to matter. This section is purely from the perspective of myself and of Patrick on our team, and we'll provide some objective frequency spectrum data after. Now, subjectively, we noticed that the Huaying fan specifically, that's the one that we had in the review units, the one people seem to generally online think is more desirable. We noticed that that one sounds a little bit heavier than the Delta fan, and in talking with Mike Chin, he seems to agree with this. This tracks with an overall lower output at 150 hertz and lower in the frequency range. More on that later. The Delta fan has two sharp peaks that make for the more prominent tone that the original commenters were complaining about. The Huaying fan isn't as detectable for this higher pitch behavior. So that's the subjective stuff. You might disagree. If you do, feel free to post your well thought out comment in the comments below, because subjectivity is hard, and that's really all there is to it. Objectively, this is where we're a little bit better. So frequency response, frequency analysis is new for us, and this means we're using softer language here. As we start to learn more and get more confident in our abilities, we'll be able to use more terse language when it's deserved. We are confident, at least in the testing process. It just comes down to the data analysis. So ultimately, it's difficult, if not impossible, to show whether a sound is good or bad on a graph. The closest we can get is a frequency spectrum chart, which can help explain why one sound is preferable to another. These charts were created by logging A-weighted spectrum values over the course of the recording with a running 3-block average to account for minor variations. Then we selected a representative entry at the 30-second mark. We'll start with the minimum 4100 RPM setting, mostly used on desktop or under low load for the Steam Deck. We're charting the A-weighted frequency spectrum of both recordings against each other, which shows relatively little difference between the two, other than a definite spike for the Huaying fan at around 345 hertz. This could be the source of the light humming tone generated by the Huaying, although the Delta fan's overall volume is technically higher. At 4100 RPM, there isn't as much of a difference as elsewhere, and that's why, to just really exaggerate things and speed things up, we tested the fans at 7000 RPM. The normal max is about 6300, but we forced the fan speed up for this testing. 7000 RPM is the speed that created the widest gap in SPL, so there are clearer differences here. The Delta fan sounds higher and louder to our ears, and the chart shows the most obvious differences in the 47 to 520 hertz range. Both fans develop a peak at higher RPM at 117 Hz, but Delta has additional peaks at 352 Hz and 463 Hz, as well as slightly higher results in general above 4000 Hz. We noticed that the Delta fan had a sharp spike at about 400 Hz and 500 Hz, which together make the mid-range tonal hum more noticeable in the Delta fan. The Huaying fan has a sharp peak at 400 Hz as well, but it lacks that secondary peak at 500 Hz, and they're less pronounced anyway. Now we're going to open the fans up in a second, but overall from the data we have here and just from listening to it subjectively, the differences in the sound profiles we have in-house for testing for the two fans, they're noticeable. They plot, we can hear them by ear, and we can also see them a little bit in frequency spectrum. We can see a little bit of a difference in noise levels, but there's one major aspect here that's really been left out of the conversation thus far, which is what's the end game if you get the worse of the two fans, if you think one of them is worse. And you've already decided on this because we gave you the noise profiles earlier. So the end game is there aren't that many Steam Decks out there. So what are you going to do? You're going to return it. You can control the fan speed using the custom profiles to slow it down a little bit, but that's not really a fix. And so you're left with sort of a few main options. One of them is you could return it. If it's actually driving you crazy and you can't stand it, then send it back. They're not going to give you one with a different fan. They probably aren't guaranteeing that at this point, but perhaps at some point that'll be a thing. Second option, the fans are extremely easy to take out and replace. So if you can get one of the fans, whichever one you prefer, if you can buy that from something like DigiKey or Mouser or eBay, AliExpress, then go ahead and buy it and drop it in. So we've given you the part number for the two fans. You can go try and find them. They're not always out there, but it seems like they pop up sometimes. That would be very easy to replace. It's something like maybe 10 total screws and a cable. Just do it with the system off, of course, and that would resolve your issue if you have a preference between the two. But one thing we wouldn't do is go try to chase down specific Steam Decks with specific fans. That just seems like a waste of time and a nightmare right now. If the difference is driving you crazy, that's still not really the approach we would take. And as speaking just subjectively for myself and for Patrick, as people who have both of the fans and multiple Steam Decks that we had for testing through various revisions of the process, we don't think it's really worth focusing too much on trying to get one fan over the other. But we understand also that some people are more sensitive to sound than other people, and so that's kind of difficult to reconcile if you are. That's not to say that you shouldn't be. It's just that apparently Patrick and I don't really think there's as much of a noticeable difference as some of the people who are posting online. It's possible that our two units aren't as extreme as some of the ones online. We can definitely hear the higher pitched hum in the Delta fan. I would probably call it overall worse in the noise type department. So I do agree with the analysis that people are posting online saying the Delta one's worse. From a noise profile, we do agree that it's worse. It's just, is it bad enough to go trying to hunt down a specific Steam Deck in the scalper market? Probably not. It's already kind of rough out there anyway. Okay, enough of all this and standing here. Let's go somewhere else and open up the fans. There's no way to open these without damaging some of the plastic shell, but we can fix that, repair it after the fact. Also, we have extras anyway. This is the Huaying fan. So this is the one that came with the original Steam Decks that we looked at, the pre-production ones. Let's get this open first. Okay, so that is open. We're gonna have to sort of glue that back on later. We're gonna come back to this and look at the differences between the two. This one has to come out of the Steam Deck. By the way, if you're doing this yourself to replace the fan, this is a good time to watch. I've already removed all the outer screws. There's only 8 of them for the shell. Now we're gonna go ahead and remove the cable itself. You pull by the connector housing, not by the wires. Then we remove 2 screws here and it comes out. Okay, time to open this one. Same thing. So in terms of differences, they are actually designed in a fairly different way between the two of them. The Delta fan that I have over here, if we get an uptight shot in B-roll, has these more curved fins coming out of it. And also they terminate differently. They're much taller. They come closer to the height of the fan hub itself. And they don't come all the way down connecting to the hub unless you count the very base of the fan here. It's still a 4-pole motor inside of the Delta housing. The original production unit fan instead has its blades sweeping down much lower, coming down to connect halfway up the hub, and it's also lacking the hard base where it's just impassable for air that the Delta fan has. So at the very base of the hub for the Delta fan, up until it connects to the blades, there's just a solid barrier where there's no movement there. So I think this one has about 47 blades in it for the original Huaying fan. And this one's also about 47. I would be plus or minus 1 on the 2 fans. So they're similar blade count, but very different blade design. The Delta fan ends up running much closer to this bottom corner of the housing over here. I'm wondering if maybe some of that whistling noise comes from there or if it's more inherent to the design itself. And actually at the bottom side of this, there is a difference where with the Delta model, we're seeing this much larger hole here for air to move, cut out from the side. And on the original model, we don't see as significant a whole. Now in our thermal testing, they looked about the same. They performed very similarly. It was mostly within error. So there wasn't a big difference there thermal performance-wise, which isn't a huge surprise given the relative simplicity of these fans. But that gives you an idea for the design. It might explain where the differences are coming from in terms of noise. Ultimately, all that really matters, though, is that you can, in fact, hear it subjectively. So that's kind of the start and the end of it. But cool to see the different designs, at least. So that's it for this one. Let us know what you think overall of the controversy, the Steam Deck fans, of course, on their own. And then also for our presentation of the frequency spectrum data, we did work with consultants on this to at least kind of try and get it into a good place for publishing. Now it's just a matter of Patrick and I need to develop the skill set and frequency of use on all of this to really feel pretty good about the data as it's presented, although we feel pretty good about the data as it's captured. So we're most of the way there. Now it's just the hard part of conveying it all in video format. One more thing too, we were talking about this, and because sound is so difficult to test objectively and develop data for objectively in terms of extracting meaning from those frequency numbers, we are going to, for anything that we do like this, we're going to be producing captures and samples of the sounds we're analyzing, because ultimately, and this is what Mike Chin kept telling us from formerly Silent PC Review, SPCR, ultimately it comes down to what does the user actually think of the noise. And it doesn't matter what any of the charts say if when we play the sample, you hate the sound or you think the sound is easy to ignore, because that's what really matters. So we're going to keep presenting the samples for you in the videos. That way you can at least make a determination just subjectively for yourself, because that's all that ultimately matters. And then we'll go through the data and it's more of an interest piece at that point. We're understanding the data that came out. So that's it for this one. Thank you for supporting us. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab one of our toolkits, our mod mats, or our mouse mats, or you can grab something like our coaster pack. All these help fund our testing operations. We spent weeks working on getting this online operational in a good state. We're really happy with it. And the GN lab here is looking pretty good right now. So excited to do more. Subscribe for more as always. We'll see you all next time.